All right. I am in the batter's box now, Matt, and you're up on the mound, so I'm ready. Fire away.
Well, okay, you and I have known each other for nearly 45 years, right?
Yeah, long. Yeah,
Well,
yeah, yeah.
that's at the very beginnings of our careers.
Right, very much so.
Um, so
It,
it's interesting. I know some stuff about you, but I don't know things about you. So let's start from the beginning. So you are from Wapato, Washington. That's
yeah,
where you grew up.
that's where I grew up.
Where is Wapato and what was it like?
Okay, so Wapato is about 15 minutes, maybe less than that, outside of Yakima in central Washington. And I was born in Yakima at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, which no longer exists, but my sister Sally and I were born there. Sally, my sister, is 5 years older than me. I'm the youngest. My parents had six kids. I had two older brothers, two older sisters. We lost a sister in Mexico. I believe it was an influenza outbreak, and she died when she was about a year old. Her name was Rosa Avelia, and she was kind of in the middle of the pack. So my older siblings were born in Mexico. Then Sally and I were born here in the States in Yakima. And then Wapato was a small farming community. My grandfather had actually when he left Mexico, he had to flee because he was a landowner. There was a revolution. It's a big story. And then he was in Wyoming. And then eventually, I had some uncles that had written him a letter about, hey, there's a good ground in the Yakima Valley because they've been on the migrant stream. And so he ended up moving the family there, settled in Toppenish. My parents came in 1946. We eventually settled in Wapato. My dad farmed. Wapato is a small community of about 5,000. It was just kind of this little town. Um, all the businesses were owned by white people, but it's kind of smack in the Yakima Indian Reservation. So it was kind of interesting because you had the Yakima Indian Reservation, Yakima Nation. You had Mexicans that lived there that were part of the agriculture scene, and picking the crops and all of that. And then Filipino and Japanese community as well. So it was mixed, but uh, people mixing together was kind of so-so because it was also a very
Hmm.
conservative Republican area. And there was also, I found out some information about back in the 20s, the Ku Klux Klan was very active in the Yakima Valley, and they tried to chase out the Japanese and the Filipinos. And so it's an agricultural area, and it's very conservative, very
So
conservative.
your parents were married in Mexico, so they
That's right.
didn't kind of
Yeah.
find each other once they got here.
No, no. My dad had, as I mentioned, my grandfather had been a landowner in Mexico. So there was a revolution. And in 1918, he had to flee. And my dad was about 5 years old at that time. And eventually, my grandfather sent for the others after he established himself in the States. Um, but my dad got in a little bit of trouble when he was a younger man in Wyoming. He got in a shootout with some guy. It was very Wild West. And so my grandfather said, well, the sheriff came and basically said, you got to do something. My dad's nickname was Güero because he was light skinned, and that's a term in Spanish. And so the sheriff came to my grandfather and said, Güero is going to get in trouble here. This feud continues with this guy. And so you better do something about it. So my grandfather then sent him back to Mexico where he had some property there, and set him up to farm to get him away from all this. And eventually he went back there. It was in northern Mexico. And then he met my mother, who was a school teacher. And then eventually they got married and lived there for a while. There was a drought where he was farming. And then, he decided to come to the States because we had family here. So that's how
Mhm.
they ended up coming here. Yeah.
So you grew up on a farm and you worked
Yeah.
on a farm,
Yeah. We
and
were the
so
labor force for our family, That I think that's kind of why they had kids. Well, the fact they were Catholic as well and Mexican and all that, you had a lot of kids. But we were the labor force for my dad as a farm. My dad farmed when he came. That's what their background was. And he eventually worked with my grandfather, then went out on his own. And so we all farmed. Dad farmed sugar beets back in the day when they did sugar beets in the valley. He did corn, field corn, sweet corn, wheat. He did produce from tomatoes to cucumbers to peppers to cantaloupe to watermelon. And everybody went out and worked, because that was the way it was.
So, but and then you're kind of growing up in Wapato. You had a pretty normal sort of rural upbringing, but there were some racial overtones as always because there were a lot of different groups there. So what was that like? When you first were aware of sort of the racial animus that
Yeah.
exists?
I always knew that there was something because I think I told you this that we when I was in kindergarten we moved to this one place and the road was called Lateral One. It was about 5 miles outside of Wapato, and on that road, it was interesting because there were orchards, and the orchards were all run by the this Bulgarian families, and so there were the Demovs, the Deva, see, pardon me, the Demovs, Ivanovs, Nikolovs, and then Demov, and then us. And so, then there was us, this one Mexican family. Then there across the way, this canal bank, there was a German family. Then there was another Mexican family. Then there were Yakima Indian families. And so everybody sort of knew each other. And so if we needed, pears or apples or whatever, we just went to the Demos and picked what we wanted. They would come over and get produce from us. And then the Hop Tots who lived up the road, they would bring Columbia River salmon and smelt. Everybody traded. So it was just like a little salad bowl that was there. But you always knew that there were differences. And I always knew because I was dark skinned. And people would always say, they call me Negro, or I got called the N word a lot. If I could have, $1 for every time I got called the N word, and I'm talking the bad N word, I'd be a very wealthy person. But I always knew it was there. It was there. But what I really knew was I was in second grade, and one of my brothers had a girlfriend, and she came to live with us for a while. But when I really realized it was that her mother called our house one time and she asked to speak to my parents because I answered the phone. I was just a little guy. So I handed it to my dad. Well, anyway, so her mother called and told my dad that she didn't want my brother going out with her, dating her anymore, her daughter. And then the daughter eventually, my dad basically told her to go to hell, that he could date whoever he wanted to date. And then the girlfriend, came to our home crying, and because she, was just upset because her mother did that. And then eventually she moved in with us for a while,
Huh.
and she was her senior year in high school. Um, but it was basically because my brother was Mexican, she was white. So you knew what the deal was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I always thought, okay, this is not going to happen to me. Well, it did, it did. And then the same thing. So you knew that there were, you know, you knew that there were big differences, and you knew that, that, and particularly as I got into, junior high and high school, it almost got to be a joke in a way that guys, well, yeah, did you date so and so, or weren't you dating so and so? Oh, no, yeah, her parents don't want me dating her because I'm Filipino or Mexican or Indian or whatever.
Yeah.
So it was there. It was there, just strong, and you knew it, and you had to deal with it. So
Did you speak Spanish at home?
Spanglish.
Spanglish.
Yeah, because my mom and dad both spoke Spanish. My mother, especially, she'd been a school teacher in Mexico, so she spoke very good Spanish and wrote, very well. Always was encouraging us to kind of keep the language. My sisters did really well. My brothers, not so much, and me. Although I'd have to say I'm better than them. And I understand really well. And when I go to speak, I have to really think about it because
Yeah.
I kind of like I grasping for words. And I don't feel like I'm comfortably, being real, fluent or opposing or saying that I'm fluent. I'm kind of average. So I think about it, and then if I have to do something in Spanish, I really have to cram to be able to do it well. That's something that I'm not happy about. I feel actually kind of embarrassed that I didn't keep it, but it was kind of the assimilation thing.
Yeah.
On one hand, I was we were very Mexican at home, but also American. And then at school, I grew up with teachers telling you don't speak Spanish. They would say it's okay to speak Spanish during the migrant times when I was in grade school and the kids would come in and they'd assign me to the kid that couldn't speak Spanish or couldn't speak English to help him go to the bathroom, do whatever during the short time they would be there. And then after that it was no, don't speak any Spanish. We don't want you doing that. So
Hmm.
yeah.
So so when did you decide that you were going to college, and how did you pick WSU of all
Yeah.
places?
It was a girlfriend I had when I was in high school. Actually, she was the one that convinced me to go to college and suggested I go to college. And a good part of it had to do with she was white, I wasn't, and we had kind of we dated and under the radar, because her parents didn't want her with me because I was a Mexican. And so about when our senior year came around, or actually ended the junior year, started talking about that. We kind of talked about it a little bit, but then our senior year, she's the one that says, well, you should really think about going to college. Actually, not only her, but I had a counselor, and his name, gosh, he was from an Indian tribe in Idaho, and he big tall guy, Larry Porter, that's what his name. And he came to me one day in my junior year and then carried over my senior year, and he said, "You know what? You can go to college. You really need to think about this." And he kind of kept on me. And then I talked to him about, what that meant, because I really hadn't thought about it that much because I was, young dumb kid.
Well, how many
And
people in your family went to college?
My brothers both went to YVC, Yakima Valley Community College, briefly. They
Mhm.
went for just like maybe quarter semester, nothing really serious. Of course, they were in the generation that where college it was not, it wasn't affordable, but also it wasn't like you had to have it for whatever
Mhm.
you're going to do. Then they both went to work at a paper mill in Port Townsend where my sister and her husband had settled, and it was a good paying job. So they went there, and that's eventually where they settled. I eventually worked at that paper mill when I was in college one summer, but knew I did not want to do that. And I also knew that I didn't want to continue to work on the farm. I mean, that when you do that kind of work, you know, it's a great motivator for
Yeah.
trying to
So,
add
so
something
why
else.
broadcasting? How did you get hooked up with broadcasting?
I had always had an interest from the time that I was a little kid. Uh, you know how you talked about that you'd like to tinker with machines and things like that.
Hmm.
I would hear these voices. We we would wake up in the morning. My dad would always get up, got awful early, make this Mexican chocolate and toast and stuff. And we had this big radio console. And every morning, he'd wake us up and I would hear the CBS News World Morning Roundup and with Dallas Townsend. I'd hear all these voices. And I got just enamored with that. And I thought, man, that sounds like it's kind of be a cool career. When I was 8 years old, I got a transistor radio that I could get stations from around the country, particularly in the summer, out in the boonies, where we lived. You had this kind of open sky, and I'd hear all these disc jockeys. So I just got interested in it. And then I also had an interest in current events. For some reason, those things I liked reading the paper. I kind of knew what was happening in the world, and I was always interested. But I never wanted to tell anybody that was my interest because I was embarrassed, because that's like not what we do
Hmm.
supposedly at that time. And I was a very average student and things like that. And it was always kind of a confidence thing that I struggled with. So anyway, what happened was that was always in my mind, and I wasn't really I mean, I knew who Edward R. Murrow was, but I didn't really know that much of his legacy at WSU. And then when I went to school there, it I ended up finding out about it. But you know, when I made the decision to go to school to WSU, it was really so that I could be with this girl. And my first semester there was just hell. I mean, I had a trouble adjusting to school. The relationship was not going well. I got in a car accident. I had bronchitis and pneumonia. It's like everything that could go wrong did go wrong. I had a 0.93 at midterm. And man, I was like just so embarrassed. I was embarrassed to tell my family, and I did. And I just, uh, I didn't want to let them down. I managed to pull it out and I got a 2.07 at that semester because the last 3 weeks when we went back for finals, I finally got well and I was able to kind of just focus. And then after that, I never got below like a 3.4 because I think I did it all because of fear. I didn't want to ever
Hmm.
feel that again. But I finally got into a communications class because I got locked out my first semester and I got
Yeah.
into the communications 101. As soon as I got into that, I knew that's what I wanted to do. And that's what I went for. I thought, okay, I kind of didn't know what I was doing, but I knew that's what I wanted to try to do. So I just focused on that. And yeah, that was one of the big focuses, and uh, just that's what I wanted to be, and I
So
decided I
first,
wanted to be a reporter.
first job out of the out of this graduation. What was your first job?
My first job was at Como Radio in Seattle as a news reporter. I
How'd you
was
get the job?
Well, my WSU connection helped me. There was a
Mhm.
guy he was a station manager at KWSU Radio. His name was Bert Harrison, and I was like on the staff there. And Bert was this kind of crotchety old guy that smoked cigarettes a mile a minute and cursed a mile a minute, and but he was a very flowery writer and all this stuff. Anyway, he came to me one day and he said, and for some reason he liked me, and so he came to me one day and said, there's a job opening at Como Radio in Seattle, and the general manager was a WSU grad, and he knew him, and he said, you know, here, check it out, and then he sort of helped me, and so I put together a tape, sent a resume, didn't hear anything for a while, and then Bert came to me again and said, I think they're going to want to talk to you, so why don't you give him a call? So I did. He gave me the number of the general manager. I called, and so they said, well, can you come to Seattle? We'd like to talk to you. And sure. And I figured, well, a couple weeks or something like that. And they said, "Can you be here Friday?" And this was like a Wednesday or something like that. So I said, "Sure." So hopped in the car, and I had a '65 Impala that I had for a long time, and a couple of buddies came with me, and we drove to Seattle, and I interviewed, and the end of the interviewed for about 3 hours. Went with Brian Johnson, who was the news director there, and
So it was a
got
reporter
my job
job.
there. Yeah, it was a reporter. You would report and also uh, anchor newscasts. And um, came back after all this conversation, and they offered me the job, and I was like
Nice.
floored. Yeah. And
So,
in my first 6 months, they were really hard because I was a newbie. I was, 21.
oh, coming
Everybody
out of
there
school, you
was
don't know shit.
you didn't know shit. And people there were, they'd been in the business 30 years, 20, 30 years. I was this, just this newbie and the program director was on my case. He wanting me to sound a certain way. And I used to get so stressed out I'd lose my voice, in radio. That was
So,
bad.
so
So
how
yeah,
many people of color? I mean, it was pretty white back then, right?
zero.
Zero.
I was the only one. I had actually they were trying to diversify, so they had a woman that her name was Barbara Stenson, who was a reporter there. They were just trying to also even have women on the air, and
Mm-hmm.
so they brought me in. They'd had here and there some African Americans that were as reporters and things like that, but yeah, I mean I was it. And in the TV newsroom there were maybe a couple there were a couple, let's see, two African American reporters, no women at the time that I remember. But Connie Thompson, actually, who we've interviewed on our podcast, she was just starting out, so she was a production assistant, and so we kind of came in about the same time, and so I saw her, you know, grow up and move up the ranks. But yeah, so that was back in the day when
So how long
very
did
very
you do
few of
that?
us.
How long were you in radio? And
Two
when did you make the leap to TV?
2.5 years. I was there at Como for 2.5 years. Then I got a call from someone that we know, a guy named Dick Warzinski, who was actually at WSU and was a mentor to me at WSU. One of the few people who actually talked to me in the communication department was very, helpful and caring and all of that. So I gotta, always have felt very kind of indebted to Dick because he helped me out a lot. Um, and he called me one day. He was working as a director at King TV and said, "There's a job opening here. You should really look at it." So I did, and then not wholeheartedly because I was fairly comfortable being at Como Radio, and then he called me again. Actually, his wife called me the next day and said, the program director, a guy named Bob Guy, you know him,
I know.
and he was an unusual fellow. He wants to talk to you. So they said, can you meet him 5 o'clock at the Dart? And the Dart was this kind of
It was
really
a dive bar.
dive
Dive bar is
tavern.
giving
Yeah,
it credit.
yeah. And it was on Western, and not Western, but gosh, what is that?
Terry, right?
Yeah, Terry Avenue, and right below it there. And so we actually went to the bar, and the guy that they wanted to replace, who was actually a Mexican American fellow named Tony Rodriguez, who had a drinking problem, and he was in there getting drunk. And so Bob Guy met me outside of the place and said, "You know Tony Rodriguez?" And I go, "Yeah, I know who he is." And he goes, "Well, he's in there and he's getting drunk, and so we need to go to a different place." So we went to the Terry Avenue Freight House. He told me that he wanted to replace him. He offered me the job immediately.
Uh-huh.
And then we kind of talked a little bit about money, and he says, "Well,
So
I
what
gotta
was the
go do
job?
this." Job was to be a producer. They had a public affairs show that they were doing, and my job would be to come in and to replace Tony doing that public affairs show. I also told him I wanted to be on the air. And so he said, "That's fine. You can host the show." And then be a part of the public affairs and the production department.
Mhm.
And I was a part of both of those, although I was situated more in production. And then, yeah, that's what it was. And then I came in and started producing a show called Another Point of View, which was a talk show kind of focusing on issues of communities of color.
So
Although it could be a little more of that.
at that time, King, you got to give him credit. They were pretty diverse, both on the air,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
more importantly, behind the scenes.
They did have much more diversity than Como did. Como actually, well, of course, even now, but it was a very conservative place. I think
Mhm.
everybody looked at that time as Cairo being very the conservative place because of it was owned by Bonneville, which was a Mormon-owned broadcast operation. But to be honest, Como was far more conservative in their ways, and there
Yeah,
was
I
like,
mean, let's face it, it was
yeah,
a white
yeah,
guy
yeah.
operation.
It was very much so, and King was too, but there was a different take on it.
No, it
Um,
was sort of the benevolent white.
yes, there you go. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
sort of the benign kind of.
Well,
Yeah, yeah,
they
yeah.
knew what they had to do,
Right. Yeah,
and they did it.
yeah,
And to their credit, they did it. They didn't do it kicking and dragging. I mean, they just knew it was the right thing to do. They were good broadcasters.
yeah. They were, and they were very very community minded, and that had to do with Mrs. Bullitt and the sisters and all of that, and you know, it was a totally different atmosphere.
Yeah.
At Como was just very kind of rigid and just it was kind of stale to me in a way.
Yeah.
But when you go to King and things were loose, and I'm talking loose, because people were like, they just everything was much different there, and it was I definitely fit there far
Yeah.
more than I did at Como, and
So, okay. So how long were you there before I came up?
I'd only been there about a year. Yeah,
Okay.
when you came on. And then I had met you before briefly,
Yeah.
when you had applied for that job at
So
KC.
I was only there for 11 months and then I
Right.
went to San Francisco, but
Yeah.
you continued on. I mean, that's sort
Yeah.
of where our careers
Right.
diverged,
Yeah.
but we stayed in touch all
Yeah.
those years.
Yeah. Yeah. I came
So
and saw you in San Francisco. You came to my wedding when I eventually got married and all that. Yeah.
yeah, it was interesting because, the racial animus that I felt was there. I was in bigger markets, so it was much more diverse. But the thing that was interesting, my whole stock and trade was ideas. So my ideas and my skill was worth money directly as a product.
Yeah.
Whereas yours, you were a reporter. So you're an employee working in environments. And you were there during a lot of the growth when they started diversifying everything.
Yeah.
Um, how did that diversity track with your career? Where did you go and what was it like at each of the stops? Because you had a number of, you've worked at all the TV stations with the exception of Cairo, right?
Yeah. I worked at Como, King, and KCTS. And, you know, King was, I really enjoyed working at King. I did kind of hit what I felt was a bit of a wall. I, you know, looking back on it, I think I was a little too anxious about wanting to. I was. I think you all of us want to like hit some level or beyond. Where we're going up the ladder, and
Mm-hmm.
I got into that, and
You got to have goals,
yeah.
right?
Oh yeah, definitely had goals, and um, King changed it. My first few years there, I were just tremendous because I got to do a lot of different things. I got to host their morning show. I did documentaries. I, you know, we did a lot of unique stuff. I mean, they really were invested in doing things in the community at that time. So, and I learned a lot from people that eventually went on to do bigger things. And it was an interesting group and an interesting time. So, but then, the company, the operation, the company, it evolved. Remember the fact that there were only three stations at one time in
Yeah,
Seattle,
exactly.
and there was a lot of money, and people could do lots of different things. Particularly to produce stuff. But gradually that started to change with the economy hitting different points.
So where did you
Things
go
not being so
next?
good. I went from King to Como. I had been, and actually it was Dick Rosinski again, who they were looking, I think, to again add some diversity to their
But
newsroom.
you went to their newsroom.
Yeah, I went to their newsroom, and that was a big change because I had been working in more long form um, type of work. And although I had done some news stuff at King, it was not on a daily basis. So I basically went from doing feature type of reporting to the grind of doing daily news. And that was a big adjustment. I initially didn't adjust well. And then kind of found my footing. I went through some changes there. The business was changing. King was changing because it then also got bought by a different company, and they as they were doing all of that when they sold King, they got rid of a lot of the I did a show called Celebrate the Differences with Lori. It was a half hour current affairs show, well, public affairs show that focused on diversity. We did it for 9 years, but they got rid of all those types of things so they could sell the company. So you knew things were changing. And then when I went to Como, obviously I was working daily news, and that's a whole different animal. Um, and it took a while for me to feel comfortable there, and then I got another. I decided to leave, and I had an
What was your
opportunity.
time at Como like? I mean, they weren't very diverse at that time. I mean, did you have any issues?
I had some issues with some of the lieutenants there,
Mhm.
below the news director. Um, Here's what there's you can face I would rather have someone be blatantly racist with me so I know where I stand than someone or people that handle things so it's like under the radar, where they make your life kind of miserable by giving you bad assignments or putting you in working weekends and uh or ignoring you. That's the other thing they did. So I went through that period at Como and finally decided that I can't do this. And I wasn't there that long when this happened. I'm probably only about 4 or 5 months. And I finally I the stress of it all was just more than I could bear. And I walked in and quit one day. And it all had to do with the fact that I felt like I I just felt like a failure. I was having trouble with my confidence. I didn't feel like, I got along with a lot of the reporters and staff, but the people that were in the management positions, particularly the daily lieutenants, it was not working. And but so I eventually had this exit meeting, and I was asked, "Did you feel that it was that you're being that there's racism going on here?" And I told the person, their human resources person, I said, that's a real tough question to answer because for several reasons. Number one, I haven't had anybody come up call me a spick or the N word or whatever, but there's this kind of subtle thing that can happen where you get ignored
Well,
and
anybody of color gets it. They know what that is.
yeah.
I
So
mean,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. But it wasn't blatant, but it
yeah.
was
It
that
never is.
this thing underneath where you're getting slowly, screwed over. And
Well,
I
so how
said,
many Latinos were on the air at that time?
so there was just me. Oh, there was another that came in, a woman that came from Texas, and she was there. I think worked there for maybe 2 years or so. Then eventually, I think went back to
In the
Texas.
whole market, there's only two.
Oh no! At the time, I'm talking to Como.
Okay.
I had Latinos at the time. See, King. There was Carlos Del Valle. Well, I think Roberto Romero was over there then. I don't remember any at Cairo right now, or at 13 was having. They were doing news. I can't remember any over there. At Como, there was me, and then there was a woman named Rebecca Rodriguez.
Okay. So
But
there
yeah,
were some people. So
some,
okay, so
not a
you
lot.
quit.
Yeah,
So you quit.
so I walked in and I basically said I'm going to quit. And then what ended up happening was that kind of the shit hit the fan, and people got called out after I did this. Went in and did this exit interview because they'd asked me about some people there that they'd had some issues with, I guess, before. And so some of those people that I had issues with before then came to me afterwards, saying, "Don't go,
So did
don't
you go?
quit." Ended up, they came back to me and offered me a part-time up job, saying, "How about you work like weekends and one other day during the week?" So I think ended up working Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I ended up was working part-time, but I kept it partly because I didn't have any other plans, and I
Well,
had
plus you
little
had a
kids. I
family.
had a
You had a
family. I had little
family.
kids and a family, and that freaked out my then wife, which I don't blame her. But I was also kind of injured at that time in the sense that my my confidence was just at a low point, and I have battled depression, and so it, I'm sure I was struggling with that as well at the same time, and but I was struggling. I was really, but one of the things that happened was that when I made that decision about I was going to leave, my work changed. I suddenly, I think I took a weight off myself, and my work got better. I just, things got better because I finally was just saying, okay, I'm not really beholding to these folks. I can go do something else. And eventually I started doing freelance work, and my confidence built back up because I kind of thought, well, I'm not that bad at this. I'm not that stupid. And the other thing that really helped was that in the newsroom, some things changed because those folks that were making my life a bit of a living hell, they got called out.
Mhm.
And so
So
that
so
was a good thing.
how long did you stay there then?
I
Part-time.
was uh I was there about another 2 years.
Mhm.
And yeah, and then
So
yeah.
this is a question that has always baffled me. I mean, you're very talented and you were a great reporter. Why did you stay in Seattle? I mean, you could have gone anywhere in the country. Being a Latino on the air, that
Yeah.
was worth something at the time.
I part of it was I had tried a couple of times to go elsewhere, and actually had uh, ABC News contacted me, and I was interested in doing it, but then I was married. My daughter was like 2, and my wife at the time, she was excited for me when I told her about the opportunity, but the idea of moving away was, we would have had to relocate to either Los Angeles or Miami. And and I it just, remember how you talked about, well, you had a job opportunity in New York
Mhm.
and you couldn't do it because you didn't want to put Althea out because she was in her. Well, my daughter was little, my wife was, her family was here, and I knew it was not going to be, as much as I kind of wanted to do it, and I don't want to put it off on her because it really, yeah, so I just thought, okay, this isn't going to work for the family.
Yeah.
And so I decided I gotta, no, that she's not gonna be happy, and we wanna, this is where her family is and things like that. So I said, no, not gonna go for it. So I decided I just, and frankly, I think I'm lucky that I got to stay in Seattle the whole
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
because I did build, a certain reputation. And yeah, uh, and I didn't have to move around the country like
So
a lot of people
okay.
do.
So after that, after your part-time gig at Como, you went back to King, right? To Evening
Um,
Magazine?
no, at the part-time thing at Como, I did that for another 2 years or so. And then actually also they had a show called Rainbow Express, and Josephine Chang and I started doing that together.
Mm-hmm.
And then it evolved to another show called True Colors, that Vivian Phillips and I did for, oh boy, we did it for like 4 years. And then an opportunity came open at KCTS, and a fellow that I know that worked there, a guy named Dave Davis at the time, he called me and said, "Hey, there's a position open here. You should come and look at this. You'd fit in well here." So I did. It was a senior producer job opening, and at the time, it was only a 1-year position because it had to do with one of those. It was kind of a um, sort of a diversity thing.
Yeah, a
And
grant-based
right,
position.
yeah. So I decided to take it. I decided to take it partly because I was working freelance. I was working at Como on the weekends. I was working constantly,
Hmm.
and uh, I was getting kind of burned out. But I also was having to pay Cobra, all this stuff, and so I thought, well, I could go there and have kind of a more stable life. And so I applied, got that job there, and then started really initially doing documentaries and other stuff. And then, yeah, so I went there, and then, it started to evolve in what I was doing. And next thing I know, 23 years later, I was there, and did all sorts of things, from producing documentaries. I hosted a weekly
So
current
okay,
affairs
so when did
show,
you
all
do
that.
Evening Magazine? Because that's when
Oh,
we reconnected again.
right. I did Evening Magazine before I left King. I
Oh,
did,
okay,
yeah,
okay.
I was their first reporter. So when they started it up, I think in '86, and I was, yeah, I was started it in the beginning, and then left there in '93 is when I left King.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because that's
and
when we
actually, yeah,
reconnected again.
right, we reconnected.
Because
Yeah,
I was running the national show out of San
right.
Francisco.
And we used to do, they were connected, what used to be a part of the old PM magazine.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, we'd produce stories that you guys
Okay.
would hear on your national reel. And yeah, actually, we did a lot together because I remember getting to go to San Francisco and do some other shoots elsewhere in the country for you
Yeah,
guys and
yeah.
all that. That was fun. Yeah, a lot of fun.
So, okay. So then you had your run at KCTS, and then, you know, you retired from there
Yeah,
because you'd
yeah,
reached the end of the run.
right.
So throughout your career, what was the shittiest thing that ever happened to you being in the business that was just like, just kind of sums up the low point of just being a person of color in the business?
Boy, I don't know. There's there's
Well,
several.
there's a lot of them, right? Yeah.
there were several that just um they often dealt with kind of personality clashes, or what really would happen was people that just didn't understand um the your difficulties. um Actually, this is something that happened that it I was a part of it, but I wasn't the one that they were
Mm-hmm.
focused on. But I remember this because it really bothered me, uh, because it told me a lot of what I was up against. So when I was a king, there was a particular program director who came in, and he, uh, kind of created chaos, kind of good and bad. And he had his own issues. But we were doing a show. It was actually what came before Celebrate the Differences. It was a show called Third World. And the fellow that was producing that came up with the idea, and asked me to be a part of it as the host. He uh, he was an African American fellow, and he had some challenges, and he was actually really talented guy. He just had trouble with his kind of containing his own emotions, and just fitting within a white world. That's really
Mm-hmm.
what it was. But he also, at one point, he had a nervous breakdown, and so when they this happened, the then program director brought us all in, and he said, "Well, yes, so and so is he he's gone to the nut farm. He's crazy," and just kind of went on about this stuff. And I
Yeah.
thought,
Nice.
whoa, what are you saying? I mean, the guy's a human being. What are you doing? You're basically tainting him so much. And and so this particular program director, it was interesting because um I actually I've never was never fired, but I'm sure I came very close, and he was one of the guys where I'm sure I came really close with getting fired, just because I didn't fit into his world. But what ended up happening was is that with that show, when he was going to nuke it all, and then it was guys from the community, Bob Santos, Larry Gossett, um, Roberto Maestas, and Bernie White Bear, the four amigos that came to the station and said, "You need to continue doing this show." And well, first of all, they contacted me and pulled me aside and said, "We're going to come in and raise hell." So then I was sort of, I don't know that I was actually assigned, but I took over what we were going to do there. This particular program director, he had no idea what was he was going to face with those guys. So uh, I came up with a plan to revamp the show and to do it. And we went into a meeting with him and his lieutenant and the four amigos. And I knew what they were going to do. They were going to like totally get all over him.
Yeah, they're gonna rip them.
Yeah, totally. And they were ready to bring marchers and all of this stuff. And so um, you know, he was freaked out. He didn't, because suddenly he'd never dealt with anything like this. Yeah. And he used to say things like, "Well, the minorities want this." I mean, it was that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And
Well,
and
that
yeah,
period of time of broadcasting was
yeah,
sort of peak broadcasting, right?
yeah.
Stations were rolling in money. They had money to do stuff. And there was this pervasive kind of white guy,
Oh
tough
yeah.
gangster like mentality.
Yeah.
Like, they were doing genteel work. Let's face it. You're
Yeah.
not farming, right?
Yeah.
And so these guys had to kind of posture like tough guys, and it was stupid.
Right. Right. So there was that. So anyway, I ended up I laid out this plan that I had actually developed with the gang of four. And and so afterwards he ends up, you know, because I saved his ass, then I became like his guy. And it was like, oh, you know, and he was there for a couple of more years, but and there were still more instances like that. But I see that there were more than one particular incident, you know, things like that,
Mhm.
that I had to deal with through the years. And they were all kind of at the same level of just aggravation and things that you know you had to deal with in order to get by, in order to kind of to just to deal with the system and
Yeah.
things like that.
Well, it's like you
So
and I said. I mean, it's a career of a million cuts.
yes, exactly. And so that's why it's hard to pick one particular thing because there were really so many and so many times along the way that I you know that it just was tiring.
Yeah.
That you know you feel like you're trying to dodge bullets in a way.
Well, like all people of color in this business, you end up being a survivor. I mean, that's
Yeah,
really what it
yeah,
is. It's
that's what it was.
survival.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah,
And you made it to the finish line when you retired
right,
after
right.
over 20 years at Channel 9. And
Yeah, yeah,
over that time, you built the career of being a revered sort of senior journalist statesman
yeah.
in the market.
That did happen. Yeah,
And
yeah.
so looking back, since you retired, would there be anything you'd do differently?
Oh God, yes, lots of things differently, totally differently. Uh, I think I've always thought that there are times when I could have been more aggressive about things. You know, I think there were times when I kind of wish I'd have been more like you, just this kind of unfiltered, sort of in your face thing. But it's not my personality. Um, I think there are times when I wish I would just have been more aggressive about things and uh, that I had maybe stuck up for myself or others a bit more. Uh, that I maybe had taken a chance more about
Hmm.
going somewhere else just to try it and to see what that would be like. Uh, but in the end, I think that I've been pretty lucky because I was able to stay in this town and build a reputation and build a career. Uh, you know, a lot of people they aspired just to be able to come to Seattle. I was able to start here and to stay here. Uh, and also be able to be a part of the community beyond just the business, you
Hmm.
know, what I did because I tried to be active in the community doing things. Um, and I'd like to think that I did some things along the way. And actually the thing that you know now I'm at a point in my life where I'm on the board of regents of WSU, and you know considering where I was at a 0.93 my first semester to being there, I realized that what I've been able to do has given me that opportunity. So now I'm in a different place and I really want to make the most out of that and be someone that helps those underserved and particularly in my community have an opportunity to go to college and hopefully go to WSU if they want to go there, not Oregon, not the U, you
Hey,
know.
come on.
Yeah, and yeah, so I'm in this different position and it's that being able to give back. So that part of it, yeah, it's kind of a neat thing.
Yeah.
And you know, you we were talking in the first episode, you were talking about your kids and things like that. You know, my son went to WSU and my
Antonio.
daughter, yeah, Antonio and Alicia, my daughter is about ready to have her, you know, first grandchild. And so I'm really I'm happy for my kids because it's kind of like what you said. They're both, you know, they're a good points in their lives where they're healthy and they are employed and doing okay, and so that's an important thing too. And I come from a huge Mexican American family, and that's something that is very meaningful to me, to be a part of all of that. So
You know,
yeah,
one thing that people don't understand about your side of the business is it's really hard to stick up for yourself
oh, it
because
is.
unlike like me, I walk in with a show idea and it's either good or it sucks, right? And if it's good, they make money. For you, you walk in and they're judging you.
Right.
They're judging you as a human being. So when you ask for a raise, if you ask for a promotion, you're there and they're looking at you and they're going to tell you to your face, well, you're not good enough. You suck. You're good. You're
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah.
And people don't understand how devastating that is because when your job is based on your performance, how you look, how you sound, man, talk about shaming. It's like it's brutal. And that's the part of the business that people don't realize.
That's really true. The other part of that is that, Seattle's a white city.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and then you work for people that are in management positions that are white. Unless they have some sensibility or whatever, and most of them didn't, that, some of them did, but not a lot of them didn't. Um, they have their own idea of what it the person that should be out in front of the camera and all of that. And to be honest with you, every time I tried to go for a mainstream position, which, I don't think I ever got because I didn't fit the bill of what they saw of someone that would be white that would fit that position.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew it. I knew that I was going for something that, you know, i- I'm not going to get this, but if I don't try, I'll never know. So I'd try anyway. But I knew I was up against that. So frankly, all of those minority affairs shows that I did, they gave me that opportunity because the people that, that were giving the time for those things, they were doing it because they kind of had to at
Mm-hmm.
the time, or for goodwill or whatever. For me, that was my opportunity. And then I built on that opportunity to get my foot into the door to get into the boardroom. You know what? Because if I hadn't have had that, I would never have gotten on the air. I would never have had the opportunity to grow as a reporter and a host and all those things. That's where I honed my skills. So as much as I used to get aggravated that they looked down on those shows, and even at times I felt kind of just, geez, they're just giving me some scraps here. Without that, I would not have made it. I wouldn't be talking to you now.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be doing this.
Well,
Those things that we gave me. And then, I had to take those opportunities and make something out of it,
it's always
So
a
yeah.
journey.
Yeah. Yeah. So without all of that, you know, uh, and it's just kind of scraping and scratching and crawling and, getting that opportunity to do those things. So, you reach a position to where along the way you can easily give up, or you can just say, screw this, man. I'm going to just give it all I got and, and just keep hitting the wall until you break through. So, that's what I did.
Okay. So one last question
Yeah.
till we wrap this up. What what would you say to someone who is a young Enrique?
Yeah.
Um, it doesn't have to be a guy, or it could be anybody. I
You're
mean,
right.
but a person of color. Um, what would you say to them about the business these days?
I would tell them that it is a very difficult business, that it is a business that is actually facing a lot of turmoil because of there's, uh, you know, financially and all those things. It's trying to figure itself out. So you need to be flexible. You need to be aggressive. You need to try to learn all facets of it so that you can, if one thing doesn't work out, that you can make the other, find some other way to succeed. You talked about learning all the different elements of the business. I'd say if you have that opportunity to do that, please do, because that's how you're really going to be able to continue to succeed. And whenever you get knocked down, get up, because if you don't get up and you don't try it again, then we're not going to have any representation. And you know, just just be aggressive and go for it, and don't take any shit.
All right.
Really.
Well, Enrique Cerna, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you, Matty Rotten.